Before we begin shading, take a moment to look at the photograph of the ball. Notice there are no outlines in nature. The only thing defining the edge of the ball is the darker gray value of the background behind it. So instead of starting my shading on the ball, I'm going to begin shading in the background behind it. And the background looks like it's about fourth value, so I'm using an F lead. So make sure the line you drew on the top of the ball is as light as possible, because we want it to disappear into the background shading. This is an introduction into the concept of line weight. In the next lesson, you'll learn how to control line weight. By the end of this course, you'll be able to create a drawing using no shading at all and have it feel like it has depth and structure. We will be drawing heavier lines down here where the darker values go, but for now we just need to define this top line with some light shading. As you can see, I'm just cross-hatching in the area freely, doing my best to keep the value consistent. I love the texture these harder leads leave behind when you hatch with them. I'll put down a piece of paper under my hand to avoid smudging my drawing from all this motion. I've moved to a B lead because the value is a bit darker at the top. I think it needs to get even darker, so I'm going to try a 2B. I'm still just hatching in the area. The pencil grains aren't that different, so they should blend together easily. Besides, as you know, you're going to be building up the value gradually, so you have plenty of opportunities to make that transition as smooth as you want. Go in as many directions as you want and keep building it up. Just do your best to keep the value consistent. Once you get to a part of the ball that's in shadow, you can start making the outline more dominant and darker. The background shading gets pretty light on the left-hand side, so I'll switch to an F lead to finish bringing it down to about here where the drop shadow starts. Pay attention to where my hand is positioned on my pencil. Holding it that far back gives me maximum range and control over the amount of pressure I'm applying to it, so I can keep my hatching lines very light and make relatively long, consistently straight lines. Okay, I'm going to begin shading in this big gradient across the middle of the ball, but first I want to adjust the line weight of my drawing around the area. A 3B pencil will give me a nice dark line, and it's a hard enough lead to hold a point. Just go to this point where the drop shadow starts. I'll finish darkening this part of the line later. I don't want to smudge it while I'm shading in the gradient. I'll switch to my F pencil and start with the lighter end of the gradient first. I'm going to take a very compartmentalized approach to shading this gradient. I'm going to start by shading in this area, which is fourth value. It gets about a half of a value lighter in this area because light is bouncing off the ground and reflecting up into the surface of the ball. It's subtleties like this that really make a drawing come to life, so be careful not to go too dark down here. Don't worry about managing the gradient going up yet. We're just going to work on the gradient going across first. Next, I'll switch to a 3B lead to shade in the darker end of the shadow. As you can see, I'm starting with light shading, and I'll gradually get darker, just like in the shading exercises. Don't worry about the pattern your hatching is making. You're going to build on top of it so much that it'll be unnoticeable by the time you're done. Come right up to the line of that dark reflection from the shadow in the ball, but don't start work on it yet. I'll start my second pass over my shading now, applying more pressure and beginning to build up the darkness of the shadow. I'm going to switch to a 6B lead now to build on top of the shading and really get that dark value to stand out. I just sharpened my pencil so I can start work on that dark reflection on the bottom of the ball. The trick to drawing a reflection in a shiny surface is to make it very stark with hard defining lines. Shapes in a reflection don't tend to blend into the object, so I want my pencil to be as sharp as possible. In case you don't understand what I mean by that, this shape is the drop shadow reflecting back up into the reflective surface of the ball. I've begun by completing the outline of the shape of the ball. My line is very dark because it's in shadow. Notice that my line weight is heavier anywhere the outline of the ball is in shadow, and so light it's almost invisible in the lighter areas of the ball. That's how you control your line weight. Once you've outlined the shape, start shading it in. Pay attention to how much lighter it gets as you go to the left. I'll switch to a 4B pencil for the rest of the reflection. Now that that reflection is in, I can see that this area in the shadow above it needs to get darker. Values are all relative. That value seemed dark enough until I saw it next to the even darker value of the reflection. Once they were next to each other in context, I could immediately tell that the shadow needed to be darkened. That's one of the many reasons I'm teaching you to shade in steps and in layers, slowly building up your values because you can't truly see them correctly until the whole image is complete. So knowing that, we won't be able to tell if the shading we've done so far is dark enough until we put in the rest of these light tones. So let's start shading those in. So using your 4H pencil, start hatching in the area, making sure to leave the highlights white. I'm using a 6H in this video, which you're welcome to try, but in retrospect, I think is too light. I just switched to a 4H lead to start transitioning to the shadow. 6H is so light it barely registers as second value. I would guess that this midtone is third and fourth value, so you can get away with using anything from an H to an F lead to transition from second value to the shadow area. Again, for a lead this hard, notice how I'm holding my pencil. Not up here, back here, so I can control the pressure. I'm still just cross-hatching, and it's filling in the grain left behind by that 6B lead and transitioning nicely.